There are trade troubles and economic headwinds and weather disasters on both coasts of this country, and a throne speech that offered little on any of those fronts. So we thought we would go to someone with lots of political experience to see what they think about this week and this time as Parliament reopens and, actually really operating for the first time in a couple of years. James Moore, 15 years in politics. He's been in opposition. He's been in government. He's been at the cabinet table as a Minister of Industry and Innovation, Minister of Heritage, a BC boy, but educated in Saskatchewan. So this is why we've gone to him so that he can put his brain to work on this one. You've had this perspective, James, of being the new kid on the block, arriving in Ottawa. And now it has been 2 months since the election, but it must be a crazy time for a first-timer.
Yeah, I mean, I was a staffer before I was a member of Parliament,
right.
For 6 months for Preston Manning. So I knew where the bathrooms were. I knew kind of what the daily grind looked like. I knew like sort of the base infrastructure that actually takes you, a typical workplace, it takes you a month to sort of iron that sort of stuff out. But I think the House of Commons and the way in which they actually mentor and the way that they draw in new members of Parliament and school them up on procedure, practicing question period, getting familiar with the sort of the lay of the land and the daily flow of things, I think it's way better now than it was 20 years ago when I first got into Parliament. So those new MPs, they'll have rubber legs for a little while, but they'll stiffen up real fast.
So we saw the throne speech this week, just touching on a lot of things that were discussed in the campaign. Basically, it was not much of a document, but it made me put this in the context of where we are this week. I mean, we're seeing these weather disasters, human disasters on both coasts in this country. We're already having trade fights with the U.S. Inflation is running amok. And kind of no comment on that. So what was your sense? I was reminded of the words of Joe Clark, who said at one point, in politics, you have a choice. Do you want to make a point or do you want to make a difference? And I think the throne speech was more just about making some points we've already heard.
Yeah, I mean, the throne speech had two audiences. One was to the Bloc Québécois to assure them that the money is going to keep flowing on the COVID stuff, and the Quebec dynamic on childcare will be enforced in the rest of the country, which Quebec, Bloc Québécois members of Parliament don't really care about, but they care about to the extent that it keeps the taps going to Quebec in perpetuity. And then the second audience was to the NDP, which was a promise for more spending over time, an emphasis on some kind of climate policy and Indigenous reconciliation. And so that was the audience really of the subtext of the throne speech. So, in terms of public facing document, it's typically thin gruel, which this one was. I think the biggest mistake that Justin Trudeau looks like he's going down, which is frankly the mistaken road of Brian Mulroney. Brian Mulroney's government collapsed and he failed in the end. His denouement was, yes, he upset his base by bringing in the GST. Like there are the arrogance and there are all kinds of things associated with that. But the big tectonic shift that happened with his government, where he lost the script and lost his audience, was that between effectively 1988 through until 1992, which is to say 4.5, almost 5 years, he had an obsession with First Meech and then the Charlottetown Accords in getting Quebec to draw into constitutional reform and have these endless provincial conferences and endless cycles and a national referendum, this constant obsession about the Constitution. And the public sort of said, look, I want there to be sort of, constitutional reconciliation. I want Quebec to feel like a full partner in Confederation. Like I want all that to happen, but we just had a massive recession. We have job losses. We have massive, real east-west problems. We have energy sector issues. Like we have real issues that are affecting me right now. The Constitution is good, but it seems like this sort of, ideological, esoteric, pie in the sky aspiration that you have to try to meet Pierre Trudeau and his bringing home of the Constitution, but you're doing something better by sealing it back up. And so this fight between you and Pierre Trudeau about who's got the bigger constitutional legacy. It's interesting, but I don't particularly care because I'm worried about my job in 6 weeks.
Right.
And I'm noticing, in my view, historic parallel between that and Justin Trudeau now going to Scotland, trying to, going to Washington and coming back with nothing, giving speeches about how other people have to be as forward-leaning as he is with carbon pricing and all. And the average Canadian just saying, hey, wait a minute, like, I'm here in British Columbia, as you mentioned. In British Columbia, we had 45-degree temperatures in the Okanagan. We had massive wildfires. We had 50 straight days, over 50 straight days here in Vancouver with no rain. Now we had massive floods. We got another flood coming, by the way, this probably tomorrow, another massive storm coming. We had the discovery of a cultural, of an actual genocide of children in Kamloops, the murder of those kids at residential schools. We've got, before that and before COVID, with the closure of pipelines and blockades on our railways. For lack of a more diplomatic term, I say for lack of a more diplomatic term, we've got real shit going on. And the public is saying, like, global climate change, COP26, then 27 to 28, and big promise. I get it. However, cost of living and in the election campaign, as you mentioned, the number one issue in the election campaign wasn't healthcare. It wasn't COVID. It wasn't COVID on the recovery side. It wasn't climate change. It wasn't Indigenous reconciliation. The number one issue by a wide margin, according to a consensus of public opinion research data, is the cost of living. And the two biggest drivers of cost of living are owning a home and taxation. And in the campaign, you had all the political parties on the housing side all talking about the demand side, giving people more money from nothing on supply. And on the second issue of taxation, nobody was offering tax relief. And so there's a growing gulf now between what the public cares about and what the politicians are talking about. And that's a very dangerous thing for Parliament to be drifting down that road. And that's what the throne speech sort of seemed to cement.
That was kind of the point of my question here, which is, when COVID hit, we couldn't figure out what to do. Our public health system wasn't up to speed. We'd thrown out a bunch of PPE and masks and everything else you need and hadn't replaced it, that sort of emergency supply that we were supposed to have. The infrastructure and the emergency preparedness doesn't seem to work anywhere, whether it's a house fire or a highway out or whatever it is. The infrastructure is not working. And then when you see the weather impacts on both coasts, the other infrastructure disappears, whether it's the water, clean water supplies or sewage or whatever it is. It seems like those are pretty real issues for people when they are losing their livelihoods. We're seeing farmers being put out of business, thousands of animals being lost.
Yeah. Well, we know, I don't know how to say this. We don't appreciate often how fragile society and our sense of order and peace is in the world. Yeah. When the government did their assessments of the CERB and the wage subsidies and the supports that they were going to put in after COVID-19, they found that 40% of Canadians, almost half the people that you will see today walking around, 40% of Canadians have less than 30 days of liquidity cash on hand and have less than $2,000 cash buffer between the cost of living and their cash flow. That's 40% of Canadians. So on that side, we're very fragile. We had one big weather event, and we have entire communities being wiped out in British Columbia, and it's going to cost upward of $10 billion probably to replace infrastructure, probably 2 to 5 years to rebuild the Coquihalla Highway, rebuild Highway 16, all this. So like massive consequence. And even little things like, not little things, but big things like, one nutbag goes and grabs a lever action rifle, kills a soldier standing as a sentry at the cenotaph in Ottawa, storms Parliament Hill, and gets into a shootout on Parliament Hill because our security system is so fragile. Our physical infrastructure in British Columbia is so fragile. Our PPE capacity is so fragile. Like there was a news story the other day about how in northern British Columbia, our healthcare system, is very fragile and on the brink because there's an influx of a surge event of COVID-19 infections. Yeah. Parts of the north. Well, if you go to Prince George Regional Hospital, which is physically in the middle of northern British Columbia, like their ER capacity is something like 6 ICU beds. So it doesn't take much, right, to crack the back of Canada and to make us feel very scared and very vulnerable. And when that's the case, and people are sort of, their nerves are rubbed raw about all these events that are happening around us. And then again, bring it back to the point of the conversation. Then you have a prime minister talking about the importance of global climate change and Greta Thunberg being upset. And again, we all understand climate change is real. We all have to do our part. We do need to be a leader. I get it. But can we talk about what's happening today? Like, can we talk about the anxieties that we have today about job insecurity, economic insecurity, and all that?
The other thing, again, kind of noticeable by its absence in the throne speech, is foreign policy. The phrase was "fight for a secure, just, and equitable world." Meanwhile, Canada carries on thinking whenever there's a Democrat in Washington, things are going to go well. You're a special advisor on NAFTA. We didn't even seem to get any response on the credit that the Americans are intent on giving their own citizens for buying electric vehicles, but only if they are built in America, not across this border.
Yeah, it's we're sort of back to the old order of things, right? I mean, the erratic craziness of Donald Trump and the the tectonic threat of the abrogation of NAFTA was a clear and present real threat to Canada in our economic stability and future. But now we're back to sort of tilting at windmills or whack-a-mole on an assortment of issues. The latest one is the EV tax credit the Americans are considering. So it's going to be tough. Look, with regard to foreign policy, we've had five foreign ministers in 6 years under Prime Minister Trudeau. Frankly, Prime Minister Harper had a similar record. We had a lot of foreign ministers under our government: Lawrence Cannon, John Baird, Maxime Bernier, Peter MacKay. It's like we had a lot of foreign ministers as well. And so it's but the Prime Minister is the real foreign minister for Canada, and the
always, yes.
But the suite of portfolios, right? The agriculture minister has a major, foreign policy component as well, because we're an exporting nation. The resources minister, the industry minister, the prime minister, it's an important group of ministers, because Canada is truly the most global country in the world. We're the only country that's a member of the Francophonie and the Commonwealth and NAFTA and G20 and G7 and EU and the Five Eyes, and like it goes on, and NATO. So like our global commitments and integration economically, socially, politically, ideologically, with our commitments to democracy and and NATO and so on, like our reach is truly global. Now that was, as you said, missing in the throne speech, except for the climate change component. But there are real issues on the horizon. The rise of China, the CPTPP, the nature of America and our relationship with the United States. Joe Biden's increasingly looking like a one-term president because of a number of different possible outcomes. And America is very polarized and weakened, and Canada seems to be a habitual punching bag for both parties in different ways. So, I like the way I heard someone say it the other day, like if we sort of think about foreign policy, and like if you think about it as, China across the Pacific, the problems in Europe, we go Russia to the north and America to the south, and these massive big four pressure relationships that are having spin-off consequences that are coming down on Canada. And then we're just kind of sitting here and kind of going along. And if we think that those four massive relationships, of which there are these other sort of spin-off constellations of relationships, that the biggest issue in concert with all of them is the lack of a global price on carbon. Like that's not like we're talking completely different language.
But you're saying two things, which is we're tone deaf on that larger in the global context, that when we say things like that, people go, who are you and why are you asking that? And that increasingly you see governments tone deaf at home about all those issues that are so important to individuals. I mean, everybody knows what inflation is doing to the monthly paycheck, yet you hear from politicians and the business community, savings have never been higher, there's more disposable income than ever before. It just doesn't jive with people's lives.
Yeah, there's some good data out there. I think it was Dale Bricker actually just this week put out some information about the public sentiment and what public are feeling, right? And so you can have the Bank of Canada, or you can have Minister Freeland, or you can have anybody out there sort of saying, well, look, if you actually look at the data, it's not really what people are experiencing. It's people know what they're experiencing, and you can't tell them they're not experiencing what they're experiencing. My point with that sort of that image of east, west, north, south in terms of our I mean, my point is, we've probably had 10 foreign ministers in the last 15 years right, in Canada, something like that. Is that these are extraordinarily complicated and difficult relationships, and Canada sort of seems like a cork bobbing in the ocean, just sort of going along with the pressures and tides with very little influence. Justin Trudeau is now becoming, one of the actual senior people around the table at the G7. Angela Merkel now stepping away and so on. And so he's becoming, but he is only by chronology, not by reputational equity or strength.
Yeah, that seems to be the issue for us in terms of all, as you quite rightly pointed out, we're on all of these international stages, but are we pulling our weight at any of them? Just witnessing what happened in Afghanistan. I mean, when the Americans pull out and we're not ready and we hadn't thought about it and we didn't live up to our promises, then we're left with Canadians and Afghans who served alongside our men and women hung out to dry.
Yeah, I mean, are true and tragic, and will continue to be, and we don't even know the horror stories that are happening as we chat. But yeah, look, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, former senator from New York, used to talk about foreign affairs, and he would say it's a science of single instances, which is to say it's no science at all, and that your relationships with different countries is asymmetric and all that, which is true. So you have to be nimble, you have to be tactical, you have to be thoughtful. You have all these managerial obligations because of all these global engagements that we're a part of and associated with, and we have an opportunity to participate in. But that said, for the average Canadian, given our global footprint and our obligations and our reach, we have to have a sense that what's going on out there serves us at home. And the Prime Minister is taking the bulk of his time and using these global platforms to go out there and sort of preach to a global audience because he wants to be the global cool kid as he finishes. Like, I think the tipping point for Prime Minister Trudeau, where he really risks it, is that if people think that he has sort of pushing himself away from domestic obligations and focused now on Justin Trudeau Inc., and not Canada Inc. and Justin Trudeau Inc. and what's next for his career. I mean, he's what, 50? He's not an old man. He's got a lot of runway left.
Yeah.
So, but if he's well into the back nine of his time as prime minister, and he's going to be bridging out of public life into private life, and he's spending most of that time on global stages trying to be the cool kid and the woke guy and the thoughtful guy and all that, and not paying attention to bridges that are collapsing. Now I see today in Newfoundland and Labrador and British, like
exactly,
if he's not taking care of what's happening at home, then there'll be a real hard crackback on him, and the crackback won't just be bad polls that are splashed across Newswatch or CBC. The crackback will come from backbenchers and caucus who are going to say, "Hey, my constituents are upset, and we're not doing what we said we were going to do."
Well, that's kind of the thing, because again, what we heard both on the campaign but in the throne speech as well is all about redistributing income, not growing the economy, despite you've got all these groups out there that are even groups of senators saying, look, we've got to get a handle on this productivity issue. We've got to have growth. We've got to make the pie bigger. We can't just divide it up in a different way. And the response in the throne speech is more money for housing and more money for childcare, which of course you can make that argument that they help, but it's just redistribution.
Yeah, as Lady Thatcher once said, socialism requires capitalism to pay the bills, and there's truth in the simplicity of that. But I mean, for example, you talked about EVs a minute ago in the United States, and they're a clear, in my view, violation of the spirit and substance of NAFTA and the national treatment clauses. But when you have ministers and thought leaders going out there saying, this is a real threat to Canada and our ability to build cars in Canada, and like, newsflash to anybody, like, Elon Musk is leaving California when he was annoyed with the high taxation, overregulation, and culture of California, the political culture of California and economic culture of California. He didn't say, this is awful, I'm going to go to Windsor, or I'm going to go to Oshawa. No, he's going to Texas, right? He can't, like, so on the EV side, just an example, like, the auto sector, right? Like, I always remind people that Ontario, 1 in 3 Canadians lives in Ontario, but Ontario is more than 40% of the Canadian economy. The backbone of Ontario's economy is manufacturing. The backbone of the manufacturing sector is the auto sector.
Yeah.
And the auto sector is in Ontario is the least competitive auto sector. And there are four auto sectors in North America: Mexico, which is lower wage, lower cost
Yeah.
of work. The right to work southern U.S. states. Then there's the which are getting tons of corporate welfare. Then there's the traditional Rust Belt footprint of the auto sector, and then there's Canada. And of those four auto sectors in North America, on almost every score, Canada is the least competitive, least cost efficient, least enticing to investments. And so we're going out there talking about, oh my God, these EVs, and that means that we're not going to host all this coming investment into electric vehicles, and Canada will be left out. Canada is going to be left out anyway. Yes, it's a bad policy, but it's not as though there's all kinds of investment in the auto sector that's just pining to come to Canada because we're such an attractive place to invest. That is not the case. And so we pursue things and get exercised about policies that are at cross purposes to the principle and law and the direction of NAFTA, clearly. But at the end of the day, if you win that fight, what have you got left? You're still left holding an empty bag because Canada is not a host for foreign investment to the auto sector.
Well, and the same issue we have in the energy sector, as you say, with the public statements, both the ministers of the environment and energy, one of them, Minister Guilbeault, is an actual radical activist. I don't know how else to put it. And Minister Wilkinson is very now Minister of Energy, very much an environmentalist on these issues. And people don't, yes, there's some new investment in the green side of the sector, but the traditional part of the sector is in big trouble in terms of investment dollars and therefore jobs.
Yeah, and I punching ourselves in the face is not progress. I mean, I've always had the view, and Justin Trudeau, for the first 2.5 terms of his time as prime minister, his mantra has always been, jobs and the environment have to go hand in hand. And then he gets reelected to his third term, and he seems to have abandoned that. Right now, he's going with the one. That's clearly the perception of things. Canada, as we're less than 1.5 or about 1.5% of all global emissions when it comes to GHG. But again, it doesn't mean you don't show leadership. It doesn't mean you don't do things. But being honest and clear about what Canada's contribution to the GHG fight can be and what our contribution to climate change and the global fight on climate change can be, in my view, has to reside in the fact that we are an engineering environmental powerhouse in terms of the technologies that are at play, and our ability to develop green technologies that are environmentally sustainable, that are properly engineered, that are cutting edge. Our contribution of the technological improvements in the energy sector to other countries, I've always thought that was a central pillar to our contribution to a cleaner, healthier, sustainable planet. And it seems to be that we're sort of abandoning it's not just that we're abandoning the energy sector, but we're abandoning a sector that is actually on the leading edge of developing technologies and methods of drawing energy and using natural resources as efficiently and responsibly as possible, and selling that technology and knowledge to the world and being a showcase.
I watched an interview with Arnold Schwarzenegger recently, who made a really simple, basic point, but it's because he does fancy himself an environmentalist, and as governor, he made some of those moves, but he said, quit crying wolf. Quit saying the world is going to end tomorrow because of environmental disasters if you want people to buy in, help, and change some of their behaviors personally.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of truth to that. And Arnold Schwarzenegger is a person who, he's kind of been all over the map on a lot of things, but he's someone who later in life has been, I think, he's found a calling, he's found a passion, he's been pretty steadfast in his view in these things, and also I think he would be one of the first people to say as well that through whether it's the hydrogen highway and other things that he's a guy who's had trial and error and trying to get it right, but he's I think through most of his adult life and his 2 terms as governor has struggled to get it right and try to do something. To your point that you said, there are 2 kinds of people in politics: those who want to be something and those who want to do something. He's a guy who started off wanting to be something, which is the guy who got rid of Gray Davis and became the governor and all that, to actually trying to do something and to try to find a marquee legacy piece for his life, other than Hollywood movies
Yeah.
and the commercialization of Humvees, and actually do something on the climate change side. So, anyways, he's an interesting voice who I think is worth listening to more than people give him credit for.
So, James Moore, you are now an advisor at Denton's, a law firm on government affairs and public policy, but you were for 15 years part of the conservative movement and party. So what do you make of it all? What do you make of the mess?
Well, I think it's actually better than it seems. I think the look, Aaron O'Toole, is a good friend, and I like Aaron a lot. I have great regard for him. I do think he'd be a great prime minister, and because he's substantive, solid, thoughtful, a decent guy, bilingual, cultured, experienced, and in both the public and private sector. Like that sort of group of
all fair, yeah.
Those group of capacities that you want in a prime minister are actually really rare, and he has them. And I think he's got the potential to do really good things for the country as prime minister. But I think he's on a very, and I think he knows it, on a very short leash with caucus, and a few more screw ups, and I think he will find himself in deep water. As you know, Senator Batters, has shot her shot, and who knows if she. I suspect she represents a few other people who are laying in wait to throw their stones as well. So we'll see. But I think he's on a short leash. On the positive side, we're going from the number one issue, as we've talked about, is economic anxiety and so on, and that's should be the benefit of conservatives to pivot back to those suite of. So that should be the conservatives' advantage, and also Parliament is now back face to face. And actually, if you look at, if we're fair, if you look at the Conservative Party caucus in the front bench right now, the people that I served with in 2015 and prior are almost all gone. And you see a lot of young faces. You see a lot of enthusiastic and new energy. You see, Melissa Lantsman, right? Openly married, lesbian woman who is a professional, who's experienced and tough, and she's going to be out there fighting. Raquel Danko from Winnipeg. Like a lot of these people, she's now, I guess, in her second term, but a lot of these people who are not the leader but represent the regions of the country and regional faces of the party. They didn't get to sort of be seen by Canadians because they weren't in the big house in Parliament, and they didn't actually get to present themselves. And so when you see, I think, the new blood and the new MPs and the whole team that's there, along with Aaron O'Toole, who's going to be given a brief shot here to resuscitate his leadership momentum.
The fundamental problem remains the same and we can describe it many ways. But what is the Conservative Party? You come out of the Reform and Alliance side of that. There was the red Tory wing, and there's been a merger which worked under Stephen Harper because he was a disciplinarian and a leader, and he led from the front. But it's hard to figure out how you pick a leader when the party still doesn't seem to have coalesced around a proposition of who they really are, a identification.
Yeah, when a party is founded by one leader, Stephen Harper, the habits, values, mores, dispositions, culture, language, the nomenclature about how we talk about things gets cemented around the leader, and that leader leaves, and this stuff needs to evolve, and it can't evolve. It's hard. But also leaders that have been there for a long time, when they leave, there's always a transitional headache. It happened when Brian Mulroney left, right? You had Kim Campbell, Peter MacKay, Joe Clark. Like, it was like a series of leaders. After Preston Manning and the Reform Party, Preston Manning, you had Deborah Gray and Grant Hill and Stockwell Day. Then we had Stephen Harper, and then we had the merger. Gordon Campbell left. You had Christy Clark and Andrew Wilkinson, and now they're searching for their next leader. And so when leaders leave, there's often Liberal Party, right? Jean Chrétien, Paul Martin, Dion Ignatieff, Bill Graham is the interim, and then now Justin Trudeau. So it's typical to have a few leaders as a party sort of rattles around and figures out what its focus is. And frankly, it's usually getting beaten up a few elections in a row that forces the discipline that to say, look, let's put a little water in our wine, let's coalesce around a leader and so on. But the leader from the top still has to inspire the troops to sort of stand up. It's not good enough for people to be willing to change government. It's not good enough for people to want a change in government. It's not good enough for people to be okay with you being government. People have to want you to be the prime minister. And so I think we've gone from people entertaining a change from the Liberals to wanting a change from the Liberals to maybe being okay with Conservatives governing, but they need to want you to govern. And we're not near there yet.
So what happens? What needs to happen?
Well, the issue set will change. And I think one of the worst things that the party can do is move forward, assuming the next election will be like the previous one. It could very well be, the next Liberal leader will not be Justin Trudeau, and that obviously changes everything because we have a parliamentary system with a presidential style campaign and a media that has sort of American style tendencies of focusing only on the leaders and the daily obsessions of things rather than the longer view of things. Good or bad is what it is, and so politics has to sort of operate that way. So I think it'll be an entirely different issue set. 50-50, probably better than 50-50. It'll be a different Liberal leader. So how do we move forward will sort of depend on those things. But I think most importantly, though, within the Conservative Party is you have to demonstrate the discipline, leadership, and responsibility in your own organization so the public can say, I have trust in you governing us because of the way that you govern yourself. Just as, if you're going to hire a personal trainer, you probably hire a personal trainer that looks pretty fit and healthy. Yeah. You're probably not going to go into a salon and get your hair done by somebody whose hair looks like hell. You're going to want somebody who is showing you the aesthetic and the professionalism that you're going to want to cast out. So as how Aaron carries himself, speaks, how he presents himself, how the caucus and the shadow cabinet does all that, how the party presents itself, and not just the big things, but the small things, the tweets and the fundraising letters. I mean, all that stuff. There's no margin for error. You have to look like and talk like and act like, the presumptive next board of governors and the CEO of a G7 country. It's a big job.
As with all the issues we've discussed, we also live in the shadow of the U.S. So anything that goes on in the Republican Party there and Trump or no Trump or whether he comes back and all of the new words that have entered the lexicon to describe the right, then we'll have a reflection here. And you keep fighting battles that may or may not even be real in the political debate in this country.
Yeah, it's very true. The Conservative Party in Canada has avoided the ugly excesses of what's happened in the United States. I mean, thankfully, we've had two leadership races in 2017 and 2019 in the Conservative Party. In 2017, there were 15 people who ran for the leadership of the party. And the last time there were 4, right? So, you have 18 plus some people who dropped out. So let's say 20 people in total ran for the Conservative Party leadership in the last 2 cycles. Only one, Kelly Leach, even came close to sort of talking about sort of Trumpism on immigration type stuff and doing a values test and all that. But the only other person, of course, Maxime, who has been long since discarded as a joke. But nobody else. Like, out of all the other candidates, like some people went a little further on sort of social conservative emphasis. Some people, emphasize different things, but nobody said, I will be the Trump for Canada. I will build a wall, or I will whatever our sort of version of that sort of excessive populist dog whistle ugliness that we saw with Donald Trump. Nobody in Canada even sort of said, I'll put on this suit and walk out there and see if there are any takers, because there's no market for that in Canada. It's not what Canada is. It's not who we are. It's not what conservatism is. And we've avoided that. And I think that's very good. And it's not just the National Party, but all the provincial parties as well.
And you think that the Maxime Bernier's and holding anti-COVID rallies and whatnot, you think that's a blip, not a force?
It's not a not force, right? People are exhausted and they're tired and they're frustrated. And politics is a reflection of society, not the other way around. And the anxiety and frustration. I mean, Maxime approached 1 million votes this time, right? So with a guy who wasn't in the leaders' debate, has no seat in Parliament, has a very limited voice only, and pretty much on social media, and also 338 or thereabouts, almost 338 candidates, and also like that was a large infrastructure lift that is genuinely very impressive. And he was also the only person who was talking aggressively about balanced budgets and all that. So he was kind of a lone voice on a lot of issues, some of which you and I may agree with or may disagree with, but he was a lone voice. And it actually, in my view, in some ways sort of points Aaron that, if, that thing that, the public is, is prepared to have change versus change versus is prepared to consider you versus wants you. They're not going to go from considering voting for you to wanting you if you're not actually putting something in the window that's significantly different than the status quo. Because people, I think, instinctively know that when you change governments, that's a lot of disruption. New ministers, new chiefs of staff, new officials, new learning curves, new mandate letters, like new. And and any transition and change in government is a risk at a time of risks everywhere else. So if I'm going to risk it, I have to really want you to be prime minister. And you have to really represent something different to do the risk reward ratio. Yeah, to justify the risk reward ratio. And if you're not offering something that's like, oh my God, the Liberals will never do that, and I really want that. And there was no thing like that in the Conservative platform. So the public just said, the Conservatives won the popular vote, but yeah, the risk reward wasn't there. So that's something I think the party has to do some thinking about between now and the next campaign.
Great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Pleasure's mine, Senator. And thank you for your ongoing service. The people of Saskatchewan are very lucky, and the Senate is enriched by your ongoing hard work there. We Canadians appreciate your leadership and your great experience and great mind at work in the Senate. So.
Did you learn that going to school in Saskatchewan? Did you learn that? Kidding. Nice. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Senator.
For longtime politician, 15 years, now a senior business advisor at Denton's for their government affairs and public policy group, and of course he's based in Vancouver. Our thoughts are with you all there, as we are on the East Coast, as well as you get through this this crisis, and the human cost is huge. So just know you're in our hearts.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
That's it for this edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallin.